Hi, I'm Jim Murphy. I'm the author of Becoming the Beach Boys, 1961 to 1963. I want to talk to you today about Endless Summer Quarterly. When I was writing this book, it took me 8 years to write it, and hardly a day went by when I didn't look at my collection of Endless Summer Quarterly back issues. I have them all here. Here's a good example here. This one here from fall of 2005, so 20 years ago. This issue focused on Hawthorne, 1960, and it was just packed with great illustrations and photos and stories of the Wilsons' old neighborhood and some of their friends that they grew up with. So it was, essential for writing the book, actually. So anyway, if you've not subscribed to Endless Summer Quarterly, what are you waiting for? If you're a Beach Boy fan like I am my whole life, you'll enjoy the magazine. Many of the back issues, if not all of them, are still available. It's a great magazine. It's always fun reading, and it is the magazine to read if you're a Beach Boy fan. Thanks.
There's a whole group of people, and I think it began with Dominic Priori's Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile book,
Yeah.
that suddenly took an interest in what is this scrapbook about an album that's never been heard? What is this? What is this? And so there's a whole group of young fans who came to Brian's solo concerts without any thoughts about brothers and cousins and Weird Father and none of that. They just came to it at a sheer passion. You know, you can see it in the enthusiasm of podcasts like Giggins, where there's just joy. I mean, he's lobbying for Summer in Paradise to be reissued. You know, he loves it all, and great, because that's what's going to be needed to carry this beyond us old timers. The Beatles have done a spectacular job of creating a brand that's unassailable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they had the greatest quote unquote merchandise in the world to work with. Their career ended on top with, I think the last 3 singles were Something, Let It Be, and Long and Winding Road. I mean, it's like, what a way to go out. And then each of them had solo hits and solo careers. And they never reunited, tragically, because John was murdered. But in terms of fanatic Beatle fans, yeah, we got reunions on the anthology, and we could see them. We could see the joy they had making music together. And for whatever reason, they're at the top of Mount Olympus. The fact that Brian inspired them is something that music historians and music scholars and people will know about and read about and hear about because of all the work we do. And that's what makes it important that we get it right. That Brian Wilson Presents Smile finally came out, that the Smile Sessions box set came out, that the Field Flows and the Sail on Sailor box set came out. There is this giant pile of stuff, scholars and historians, to look at and listen to and go and kind of puzzle, like, what happened here? Why aren't they, people mention the Beatles and Stones.
Yeah.
Why are the Beach Boys relegated to some dustbin over here? And we know the myriad reasons for that. But that's where the sadness, why I use the word sad, because we would go out to dinner, the 4 of us, and people would recognize him, but it wasn't the same as going out to dinner if you were going out to dinner with Paul McCartney or George Harrison or Ringo Starr. It's just a whole different thing. Now, Brian is an incredibly intimidating person. His physicality is intimidating. He's big. Most rock stars aren't all that big. Brian was taller than everybody, with the exception of
Sitting down, he was big. Even sitting, when I met him during Imagination with Melinda, they're both sitting, and he's huge.
Big guy. and because of the psychopharmacology of his life, if that's the right word, he has all these insecurities. So where do they stem from? Well, I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, but I imagine if almost from the moment you can stand up, you're being hit down, you're being verbally, um, psychologically, and physically abused, it's going to be, you're never going to get over it, no matter what you achieve. You're never going to believe you're worthy of the accolades. One of the great parts of the book, I think, is Annie Wilson's contribution of what Carl told her about what went on in the Wilson house. Now, Carl was the third. So Brian, as the oldest, is going to get the brunt of it. Dennis is going to get a lot of it too, but Dennis is going to escape.
And he's eventually going to give it back.
Yeah.
And you know, how sad that Dennis didn't realize what his full potential.
Yeah.
Um,
That's fair, but but at the same time, you're touching on something that I think is so important and poignant, which is due to Brian's upbringing and the dramatic trauma that he went through Murray, that drove him to find refuge in music. And
well, not just find refuge in music, but without that trauma, we wouldn't have the depth of the music. He's
Right.
basically, I need good vibrations. Love and
Yeah.
mercy is what I need tonight. That's
Yes.
that's what we're getting. You know, we talk about all these. We all have these theories, all these ideas. When I used to believe that when Brian got to the age that's the last named age you can hear on When I Grow Up to Be a Man, he was suddenly going to be okay. I was like, I don't know, 33, 34. Suddenly he was going to be okay. Now, how dumb is that? But like, we're always grasping at straws because we want him to be okay. And he had a really tough life, and he gave us all of this joy because of it. And so that's where I'd say my sadness comes from, is that as much as we can give back, it's still not going to change what's inside. And there's so much inside of him, we'd have no idea. He's so deep. It's, you know, you read the interviews he was doing in 65, 66, 60 into 67. He's talking about stuff that, you know, I love that picture of him in front of the Beach Boys party, a promo thing where he's holding a book on psycho-cybernetics. This guy was really curious and interested in learning about everything. And then suddenly he wasn't. Suddenly he was in survival mode. That's the sadness. For him to believe that to save the Beach Boys, he has to put Smile on the shelf. That's where the sadness comes from.
And your term, the term resurrection in the title, it struck me in the biblical sense because, in effect, he was reborn. He came back to what, to that point where he could go ahead and progress and lead up to Smile again in 2003, 2004. And it's very apparent in the book, reading some of the quotes, even just some of what happened there. And I was not lucky enough to be there, but I was at the All-Star benefit. It's just amazing the way people's lives were changed by a concert.
The happiness is it changed his.
Yeah, well, that's the important thing.
That's the thing, and all the people who sent in their recollections for the book, for the Brian Eastas, is, I think it was Bob Haynes who came up with that name. The memories they have of that. We had a very small section of it in the Beautiful Dreamer movie where I don't know who it is, says, I'm going to have my life before Smile and my life after Smile. Well, that's what happened to Brian that night. And again, goosebumps. I mean, it's all, and you know, unprodded by me, quite a few people use the word going to see him was like going to church. And that's what it felt like. And yet he's the most, what's the right word? Unpretentious person you'll ever meet.
I think,
Just you know, let's go to the movies. Let's go. Let's turn on K-Earth and let's sing along in the car. I mean, just like he's a regular guy who, as Jeffrey Foskett says, he doesn't want to be the great Brian Wilson. He just wants to be Brian Wilson.
that's one of the things I think is true about the Beach Boys when I hear different stories about them in general, how kind of everyday, they're really just everyday people. They're, you know, they have reached this iconic level due to their success. But in a lot of ways, it's certainly in my experience, I feel like they're very much everyday people that you know, that they, and I think three of us certainly have in common. My life changed when I discovered Smile. The second I saw the 85 An American Band documentary and saw them wearing fire hats, and my life changed. And then I got the Dominic Priori Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile book. And from that moment on, I just was like, David, like you talked about, and Keith, I don't know what your story is, but I went out, and once I discovered that, oh, this song, you know, on 2020, here's Our Prayer Cabin Essence, that's from Smile. And oh gosh, over here on this album, this, you know, Surf's Up, that's from Smile. And it was like trying to piece together Mama Says from Wild Honey, that's an element from Smile, and just trying to kind of piece it all together and make sense of it. But I fell in love. I fell in love with the Beach Boys when I discovered Smile. I liked the Beach Boys and appreciated the Beach Boys, but I fell in love with them when I discovered Smile.
We are in agreement on that for sure.
Yeah, and for me, no other music has really touched me emotionally the way the whole catalog really has. I don't dance to music. I listen to music. I get some sort of other connection to music. And really, I only get that with Brian. Yeah, there's other music I like, but even if I stop listening to the Beach Boys or Brian Wilson for a couple of months because I'm on whatever kick, I'll come back to it because that's home to me. You know, that's my little happy place.
It's funny, you know, I none of us, I'll assume this is true about you, Keith, were hip enough in 1966 to buy Pet Sounds and fall in love with it.
Well, I wasn't old enough to buy Pet Sounds. That I was 5 years old.
I was one when Caroline No came out on my birthday.
Oh,
March 7th, 66. I was one. I had just turned one. So you know.
A belated happy birthday to you, Caroline.
And David, I didn't know you shared my daughter's birthday too.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, Katie's birthday is also the 7th.
Oh my gosh. Well, happy birthday to her. I'm officially working on my 61st trip around the sun.
Don't get too close. Yeah. You know, speaking of which, David, so there were a couple things that came to my mind in reading the book. Like you had used a couple things. I'm just looking at my note. The Curtain Rises was one place that you just made a reference to something, setting the stage. And the thought occurred to me, you know, the story that you've really got here with Smile is a Greek tragedy. And by you incorporating the stage, I'm thinking, well, here's your cast of characters. You got Van Dyke Parks, you got Murray, et cetera, and so forth. And this has everything that you would want in fiction, but it's not. And that's where all the quotes that you used and putting it in a chronological order, it makes more sense to me. But like I wrote in my review, I'm going to have to go back and read this book several times more because I plowed through it. Now I want to go back and read it to read it level.
It's intense and it's dense.
Yes,
I don't think it's not
but
something
not in a bad way.
No, I appreciate that, but I know each time I'd have to read it for proofreading or I could make it through like half the book a day. It wasn't a Michael Connelly novel.
Mhm.
You know, this was not Agatha Christie. This was this was something that needs. The thing that I liked best was when what you said is like Van Dyke Park's lyrics. It needs to be revisited, and that to me, in a sense, kind of justifies the price because it's not an inexpensive book, but I think it's a book that the reader will come back to. Uh, you're going to come back to it again soon, but I think then sometime down the road you'll come back to it again because wait a second, is that right? And you'll because it's a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Mhm. And that was one of the other themes that I kind of had running through my mind, that you've got a puzzle going on, you've got family going on, you've got sacrifice along the lines of the resurrection. Basically, Brian sacrificed himself. But he was lucky enough to get a second family. He had his band, he had his new wife.
Well, when I was doing podcasts for the God Only Knows book, I was being asked, who's forcing Brian to go out on the road? And I'd say, you got to understand, Brian loves being around musicians. He loved hearing his music played right.
Mhm.
He loves hearing the audience respond to it, and he loves a good room service steak. You know,
That's most important.
yes. But this guy he's the greatest irony of all is that he became a road warrior. I mean, it's just unexpectedly, at nearly 60 years of age, he starts touring under his name, and nobody expected it. I didn't expect it when I was there. I mean, as I think I wrote in God Only Knows, Ray Lawler and I walked around to we looked at the theater marquee, and there's like, is this a mirage? Does it really say an evening with Brian Wilson? How could that be? And
Mhm.
I had seen him perform a couple of songs at different things, but this was different. And it took a whole bunch of dominoes just in that 2-month period for the band to coalesce and songs to be chosen and arrangements to be worked out, and a little blizzard along the way. I mean, it's just, and it was like watching somebody come back to life, because in that 4-day tour in 1999, he got better and better and better each night. I mean, when we were in Wisconsin, he said, "We got to do On Wisconsin." I mean, it's just like, you know, and the band who was on a bus that had broken down, they were all getting colds and sick, and he's getting stronger, and it was great to see. I mean, it's the whole thing is unbelievable. When I finished a draft after interviewing, I interviewed all the surviving members of the band and a whole bunch of other people. I asked, Nelson Darien and Probin, I said, would you check to see if your quotes are right? And I well, rather than excerpting the whole thing, I just sent him the PDF. And Nelson read it, and he had two great comments. He says this makes Beautiful Dreamer look like the Cliff Notes version of Smile.
Mhm.
And the other quote was, he said, this book answers everything you always wanted to know about Smile and answers questions you didn't even know to ask.
And it's true.
And that made me happy because I didn't want to retread familiar ground myself or for the reader. And so Your review was very kind and sweet. Made me smile when I read it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I look at it this way. Your book is one of two bookends that I would consider for Smile. And David Beard mentioned the other one, Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, which was really I didn't know there was so much information about Smile until I read this book. And that's where I'm now going, yeah, I got to go back and read this again because it's just, I know I missed stuff.
I purposely didn't. I purposely went with interviews I had, except for the kind of places where it's like, I got to find something that Carl said that will fit here.
Right.
And I, took a quote from the American Band documentary or some other place where it was actually Carl talking.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier about somebody who saved Brian's life, whose name will remain nameless. I'm surprised he didn't try to get his claws in on Smile somehow or another, getting Brian to do something.
David, wasn't there a 1988 tape put together to represent Smile?
I think there was talk of something. There was talk of Bruce Johnson was talking about it at the 79, 80.
Okay.
I think when Lenny Waronker said to Brian and Andy Paley, could you do something like Smile, which led to Rio Grande?
Yeah.
That put the nameless person onto the notion of what is this Smile that everybody's so excited about? And I don't know what was done. I wasn't privy. I wasn't privy to that.
Okay. Yeah, Rio Grande is a triumph.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to be very easy for Brian to do.
Amazing. Yeah, since we just mentioned Rio Grande and the '88 album, I think we should just take this moment to remember Andy Paley.
Yes. An important figure in helping Brian to keep creating.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Integral figure.
A great guy. He knew he knew the Bible of music. He knew every song that Brian loved, and he was just terrific guy to be around, and a great laugh as well. We miss him terribly. It's not a good way to end the podcast though, so you'll have to come up with something else.
Well, but you're right. I just think whenever I hear a Brian Wilson, Andy Paley composition, I get a smile on my face. A warm, just a real genuine warm, like deep appreciation of someone who managed to get something really interesting out of Brian, which seemed to kind of be absent for a while. So for anyone to be able to kind of get that spark going,
he got him to want to work for sure.
Yes.
The thing that I think about that makes me smile from that era is a song that I don't think it's come out in its original form, but a version of Saturday Morning in the City that Brian did in the 1980s, which was like, when I heard that, it was like, oh, he can still make magical music.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something on his records that makes you think it's it's still there, and I hope someday there's a Brian Wilson box set that compiles everything from all the various outtakes and sessions and the Andy Paley work and all the stuff that's unfinished.
Yeah. David, I know you've heard of, but I just have to Andy sent me, I think, everything they did together, and I heard Elbow 64 and God Did It. And Elbow 64 is so much fun, and God Did It is just kind of one of those recordings that takes you into that special place that only Brian Wilson can take you. Those are two important songs that I would really like to see the light of day.
Well, everyone has their favorite outtakes, and I have my favorite song. I mean, the '88 album is still special to me.
You made it special for me.
Thank you. Look, we love him, and he made us, he made us smile. How about that for a concluding statement? And he did it by finishing an album that in a million years no one ever thought would happen.
Well, thank you. Keith, anything else you just want to, if you had something else?
I think I've drained David a little.
I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to make
No, Keith, if you have any
The
questions,
only other
left,
thing I would,
sure.
you brought up, so one thing we didn't touch on in the book, you talk about being an artist and artistic, and there's some quotes by some I would call unconventional people in the world. Albert Einstein, kind of like, oh, this isn't who I would have expected to make a quote about that. And the artist thing is important, and I think, any artist, whether it's Brian, Mike, Carl, Dennis, the expression that they're doing, they want it to be heard. What good is expressing yourself if nobody can hear it? It's like a painter painting a room full of paintings and nobody's ever going to see them. So,
which is why Van Gogh is quoted in there.
Yep. It's, so I like, there's just a lot of things going on in the book on a different level than just talking about Smile, but is relevant to Smile as a piece and the works that Brian, created. And I was just, my other thing that I had in mind was, what was Carl thinking in the 70s? Did he really think he was going to put Smile together? Was that just lip service paid to a magazine at that time?
Well, it was part of their contract with Warner Brothers Records that they were supposed to. So I don't know that it was lip service, but it was a better answer than no, it's not going to happen. I mean, nobody wants to say no.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Brian, gave bad interviews for well over 30 years if you ask him about Smile. I mean, Sylvie Simmons, talks about Brian, just getting up in the middle of an interview and walking out and getting in the car and leaving.
Yeah.
It was unapproachable. He used the word inappropriate. Brian did. Who put that word in his head is beyond all of our knowledge.
Yeah, what is inappropriate?
That sounds like a Murray thing to me. That word sounds like.
Well, it was
sounds like something Murray would say.
Well, we know it wasn't Van Dyke.
Well, sure, definitely wasn't Van Dyke. And it's fair, I think historically it's okay to say that the I don't know about Carl and Dennis because they were just supportive of their brother.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on which book you've read, and by other people of other groups who've put out books, there was certainly within the group, an external view of the musical direction. But inappropriate.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me was that the light is working weirdly. The hardest thing for me is that context you were talking about, Keith. Is what were you listening to in 1966 that didn't make you think, oh God, this guy's going to keep us in the game? Did you think you could keep doing Cherry Baby and Big Girls Don't Cry? You got it. If you don't change, Brian understood that, and thinking you could continue to, that the record company thought with Pet Sounds, oh, this isn't the old formula, guys. We need some of that old stuff, and that that just bled into Smile, which was much more of a radical departure. You can hear Pet Sounds on side 2 of Today, obviously.
Yes.
But Smile was from another planet, a universe, and so there was fear. There was fear on everybody's part, and David Anderley says it, for Brian, support was critical. And so when he had people around him who loved him, whether he did smile or not, whether he made a record or not, because after the man who shall not be named left, there were years before Brian made another album. There was no question. It was no, hey Brian, when are you going to make another album? We just went out to dinner. They would say, what's going on? We went to the movies. Did you like it? It was okay. Yeah, it wasn't. It was just being a normal person. And so he had been relieved of the pressure. He had a sense of, as he put it beautifully, I have emotional security, and money in the bank. And so there was no, you got to do this, you got to do this. Nobody saying to him, you must work. So he came back to it in a sense naturally. And we got, we're lucky enough to get the results in years of great concerts and some great albums. That said, the 88 album remains my favorite solo album, and that was done under duress. Orange Crate Art, which he didn't write a note on, might be my second favorite solo album.
Vocally, he's superb on that.
So
incredible.
there's just a lot of Brian Wilson music that we got that we didn't expect to get by himself, and we're all grateful for it. He writes a song called the last song. Are we surprised that it's the last song?
Listen, I would pay dearly just to have the scraps that he forgot about somewhere or another.
He didn't forget about any of it. He's just not going to finish it.
And I just got reminded of another question, last one. So it seems to me that maybe it wasn't the intent for the Royal Festival Hall, but to use as much as the Smile compositions as possible, because he wasn't constrained to a double LP, a single LP, two sides, 35 minutes tops kind of thing. Was it a conscious decision not to use You're Welcome?
I mean, Darian loaded everything into his laptop and said, and that didn't make the cut.
Okay. What about anything else?
That would have been a fun song for them to do in the encore.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I it's actually a long time ago all this stuff happened.
Yeah. I know.
But Darian is the one we got to get to write a book. There's never a last word. This is the last word on Smile from me, I think. Maybe. Well, I want to see Beautiful Dream. I want to see an expanded version of Beautiful Dreamer released. But in terms of the actual in the room with Brian every day, Darian's the one.
Mm-hmm.
So get him on the podcast.
Yeah. So and you touched on this earlier, David. I've just got to kind of supplement what you said earlier. That Brian's band, and those players, Darian Sahanaja, Mickey Wonder, Walusko, Probin Gregory, Mike D'Amico, and for a while we had Jim Hines, Bob Lizick. Well, Bob was with it, but Jim was a drummer for a while.
Scott
Bennett, Paul Von Mertens,
Taylor
Mills, and Todd Zuckerman played drums for a little while. Who are we forgetting?
A whole bunch of people like Jim Laspiza who joined in
Oh
later years.
yeah, Matt Jardine, and so on. I mean, these people, they really, to me, were really a substantive part of Brian's touring success. They cared so much about recreating that music.
Well, there were two aspects to what they contributed. One was, as you say, the music. The other was as people. you won't find better people than Robin and Darian.
I'll
I mean,
agree with that.
they're just good-hearted people, and everybody came to the gig. As Nelson says, when he got the gig, he says, "I didn't realize it was two gigs. One was playing the music perfectly, note for note, and the other part was how's Brian." And the kindness that they showed him on a you talk about being surrounded by a cushion of love.
Mhm.
And that's what it took to get him out there. And we're very fortunate that we got to see him so many times and hear him sing, sometimes great, sometimes not as great as others, but to hear those songs performed live, some of some of the most magical moments of my life.
I was going to say thanks to you. So I'm just going to just leave by saying this. So if you seek these out, folks, 93 box set, find it.
You
It's
can't,
on eBay. Might
those
be
are
on eBay.
expensive.
And this one doesn't come with the autographs that I have, but that's okay. Look for the Pet Sound Sessions box set. This one, came out in 2016 too. More of a booklet. This one comes with interviews that David did with lots of the Wrecking Crew members and the Beach Boys. Interviews are in there. Carl, anyway, a couple of quotes from Dennis, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But the booklet in here and seek out the 1990s twofers that David wrote the liner notes for as well.
Well, you got to be hardcore to want to read all that. Just listen to the music, and you'll know everything there is to know. And Mr. Beard, I'll remind you that they were not called the Wrecking Crew. They were the A-list musicians, a clique of the best players who loved playing for Brian and Quincy Jones and people like that. And it wasn't until Hal Blaine wrote a book that he cleverly came up with a title for his book. And they were not wrecking anything. They were making the best music they could, and it was pissing off the people who had preceded them because they were having the hits.
But the general public, if I say that name, will be quicker to relate to the people I'm referencing, I would hope.
They will be.
All right.
Great talking to you guys anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David and David.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks again, Keith. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Hi, everyone. This is Brian Wilson, and I wanted to let everyone know about Endless Summer Quarterly. It's a great magazine. Subscribe today.